And I am Jordan. Today, in this year in history, we're going to be talking about the year 1910. But before we do that, I'd like to mention that one thing I really dislike about podcasts is when the hosts kind of go on for 10 minutes about their own personal lives and about how Dylan and Tyler, how they're doing in school and just stupid stuff like that, right? Yeah. We have done really well. We've done 10 episodes and we've never really talked about things out of our personal life, but we had to skip last week's episode and we had a few people on social media asking, hey, where's your episode? And before that, we put out a bonus episode. And the reason is because of what happened.
Yeah, about a month ago, I went in for a procedure. It was a simple in and out procedure. But with any type of surgeries, things can go wrong. And, well, things went wrong. And I, unfortunately, was in the hospital for a few days. And I'm still recovering. And I couldn't talk for about 2 weeks.
And it was pretty severe.
Yeah.
It wasn't just your voice. It was like your health.
Yeah.
Like you could have died easily.
Yeah. I almost died.
Yeah. And so for that weekend, when it happened, it was actually the weekend that the 1909 episode came out. It was a Friday of, but luckily enough, we recorded that one ahead of time and we also had a bonus episode to put out. But yeah, like it was insane. I didn't want to talk about it on social media or anything, but I thought I'd wait till today so you could tell it firsthand. And you're okay, you're alive, you're doing well.
I'm doing better every day. And my voice is still a little bit scratchy, so if you hear me clear my throat or...
Yeah, and in this time, we've had about 3 weeks of not doing anything with the podcast. Kind of a break, and it's given me time to kind of reflect on our episodes. I kind of went back and listened to them, made notes of what we could do to improve it. And because of today, I went to do the research and take the load off of you since you were, recovering. So I was like, I'll do this episode. Don't worry about it. It won't be a two-parter. But then I started thinking, this might be a good new format to use.
Yeah, because we're getting into years that have a lot of information. So to just do 15 minutes each seems, I don't know, like it's disservice to the topics we're going to talk about.
Not only that, it's a lot of information to pack in that tiny bit of space. And not only that, like we're getting into more information, more things are happening, but also like there's actual videos now of events, which in my topic, there's videos I got to watch, which is very good for research because you get to see it and it helps you tell the story a little bit better. It's been a crazy few weeks. Thank you for sticking around and listening, listeners.
What are you going to be talking about today?
Today, I will be talking about the very first black person to win the title of heavyweight champion of the world and piss off all the white supremacists all over the United States by taking away the champion title from the retired boxer in 1910. This was known as the fight of the century. And this boxer, Jack Johnson, was nicknamed the Galveston Giant. Although he only stood about 6 feet tall, he seemed to tower over everybody in the pictures and the videos I've seen. So before I get into the big fight of the century, 1910, I'll first begin with his origin story. On the 31st of March, 1878, John Arthur Johnson, better known as Jack Johnson, was born in Galveston, Texas. Look at that.
Yeah, we talked about it in 1900.
Yeah, episode 1900, we talk about the Great Galveston Storm, which means he was about 22 years old when that storm happened in his hometown. Yeah, so he was there for that. So his parents, Henry and Tina Johnson, were both former slaves. And this is not long ago.
Yeah, it's not. Like, it's strange.
I always think of slavery as like
centuries ago.
Yes. It happened just a little more than a decade since we were born. 130 years before we were born is when it kind of ended. That's insane.
Yeah.
120, actually. I'm reminded of that every time I see these dates. You hear about Juneteenth.
Yeah.
And it is crazy how recent it was. So this means that Jack's generation was the very first generation of black people not to be born into slavery in the USA. Since his parents were relieved from slavery, they would work blue-collar jobs in Galveston, such as janitors and dishwashers, getting paid the very minimum. His dad also served as a civilian teamster in the Union's 38th Colored Infantry. So he helped defeat America's #1 enemy at the time, the Confederate Army.
So he had to go out of Texas to do that, right?
Yeah. His 38th Colored Infantry was in Galveston. And yeah, they would go, I guess, northeast.
Wow. Okay.
going east to fight this. Although Johnson grew up in the South, he said that segregation was not much of an issue for him in his somewhat secluded city of Galveston, as everyone living in the 12th ward where he lived were very poor, and they had their own struggles to go through, so they weren't really focused on race. They were all just kind of making their way up, according to him. Johnson remembers growing up with his quote-unquote gang of white boys, in which he never felt victimized or excluded. Remembering his childhood, Johnson once said, "As I grew up, the white boys were my friends and my pals. I ate with them, played with them, and slept at their homes. Their mothers gave me cookies, and I ate at their tables. No one ever taught me that whites were superior to me."
And this is in Texas?
Yeah, Galveston, Texas, which I like to think is a little bit more civilized, since that was the biggest city back then, like we mentioned in 1900. Still doesn't make any sense, going there now.
Yeah.
It looks like a retirement area. People want to get a house on the beach. Not much going on over there. So Johnson only completed 5 years of school, and after he quit, he began working a job at local docks. He made several other attempts at working other jobs around town, and one day he made his way to Dallas and found work exercising horses at a local horse stable.
I don't know why I was thinking of The Exorcist.
Oh yeah, exercising.
Yeah.
Exercising the horses. Until he was fired for exhausting a horse. Jack Johnson was such an athlete, he made the horses tired. I remember you mentioned in a previous episode about how they used humans to go and deliver messages because horses were unreliable because they get tired easily. So I think a horse being that big, they'd probably tire out quicker. But Jack Johnson has so much energy, which you will find out is very useful later on in the story, that he got to the point where he's going to kill these horses.
He was just overworking them.
Yeah, and these were like racing horses too. They were there for sport, so he was a perfect man for the job, but he did a little bit too well at his job. On his return to Galveston, he soon found employment as a janitor at a gym owned by German-born heavyweight fighter Herman Bernot. Johnson eventually put away enough money to buy 2 pairs of boxing gloves, and he sparred every chance he got. A very big success story so far, right? He's born into parents of slavery, very poor, working docks, not getting respect. He's a black man on top of everything else in the South, and he takes a little bit of money he has and buys boxing gloves. In his teenage years, Jack Johnson was involved in these boxing matches known as Battle Royale. Do you know what that is?
No, I don't.
Yeah, some people kind of know. So Battle Royale is kind of like where you fight until...
Oh, like wrestling.
Like wrestling.
Yeah,
like,
everyone's in the ring and
the
then
Royal
the last,
Rumble.
Yeah, the last one standing. Is,
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the Royal Rumble, I haven't watched wrestling since the 90s, so I'm still in WWF stage.
Yeah.
But they had the Royal Rumble back then. Yeah, it was pretty much you throw them out the ring. Same type of thing. Usually they'd have about 8 black boxers in a ring. Now, why was it black? Because for white people's entertainment. They're racist and they want to see black people beat the shit out of each other. And they would fight until the last man was standing. So Johnson would usually win all of these. He would be usually the last one standing. And sometimes they do it blindfolded.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's disgusting.
Yeah.
But even then, Jack Johnson would win. He had great hearing. And he was towering over everybody, so he could just punch straight and hit someone in the head. Because everyone was up to his shoulder. So he probably just did a little windmill or like helicopter propellers with his hands and just spun around. And that's probably the best way of doing it back then, when everyone's shoulder height to you. Anyway, Jack stuck with his new job until he found a new apprenticeship for a carriage painter by the name of Walter Lewis. Lewis enjoyed watching friends spar, and Johnson began to learn how to box. So it was just kind of like go to the docks, go wherever, and watch people fight. Mm-hmm. And it's funny too, because when I was reading up on this, I was thinking of the game Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat. Like anytime they're fighting in a street fight, there's always like the village behind them. There's people, Chun-Li's stage. There's like people on bicycles and, just going about their day. And that's kind of how it was back then. That's the reality of people fighting on the docks. There's people like loading up shipping containers or whatever. And people
are gathered around.
Yeah. And people were like watching this fight. Like they're kind of working and like seeing a fight from a distance. So it kind of put that image in my mind, like Street Fighter. And anyway, Johnson later claimed it was thanks to Lewis that he became a boxer. So Walter Lewis inspired him. The age of 16, he's only 16 at this point, Johnson moved to New York City. That's a big move for a 16-year-old.
Yeah.
Moved to New York City and moved in with Barbados Joe Walcott, a welterweight fighter from the West Indies. After returning home, Johnson had a fight with Davy Pearson. Johnson remembers Pearson as a quote-unquote grown and toughened man who accused Johnson of turning him into the police over a game of craps. Called him a snitch. When both of them were released from jail, they met at the docks, and Johnson beat Pearson before a large crowd. Johnson fought in a summer league against a man named John Must-Have-It Lee. He needed it, but he didn't get to keep it. Because prize fighting was illegal in Texas, the fight was broken up and moved to the beach, where Johnson won his first fight and a prize of $1.50.
Ooh.
Which today would be about, what, $40?
Something like that, yeah.
Johnson made his debut as a professional boxer on November 1st, 1898 in Galveston, Texas, when he knocked out Charlie Brooks in the second round of 15-round bout for what was billed as the Texas State middleweight title. He's on the rise. In his third pro fight on May 8th, 1899, he battled a boxer named Klondike, John W. Haynes. And Klondike at the time was kind of a big thing. It was a region of northwest Canada, Alaska, where all the gold was. They had a big gold rush. So it was like in the media. It was a big thing back then. Now we just associate it with ice cream. But it was an honorable name then. So he was a black American heavyweight known as the Black Hercules in Chicago. Klondike, who declared himself the black heavyweight champ, won on a technical knockout in the fifth round of a 6-rounder.
Against Johnson?
Against Johnson.
Okay.
Now, you notice that the rounds they're 20 and then they're 6. They kind of called the rounds wherever. If they needed to be short and quick, they'd say, let's make it a 6-rounder. You know, we've got things to do and we've got 2 other fights after you or whatever. They would go up to 50 rounds. It was insane. There's some ridiculous long rounds that we saw about where people were fighting for hours.
That's insane.
It is. So now I think we've got it set at 12 rounds, and 12 rounds is the maximum. Mm-hmm. So I'm glad they put that in there. Imagine pay-per-view for 4 hours.
Oh my God.
You got everyone over and you just want them to leave.
It's like 4 a.m.
I know. God damn it. Fucking hit him. Mayweather and another Mayweather. Imagine that.
Oh no.
Just be 2 people dodging each other all night. Man. Anyway, the 2 fighters met twice again in 1900, with the first rematch resulting in a draw, and both fighters were first on their feet at the end of 20 rounds. Jesus. Johnson won the third fight by a total knockout when Klondike refused... Sorry, I said total knockout. Technical knockout when Klondike refused to come out at the 14th round. So he already defeated him. He was like, I'm not coming back out. And I think he claimed an injury. So... let's go a little bit further into the future because there's a lot of fights here. On February 25th, 1901, Johnson fought Joe Choinski in Galveston. That sounds like a Batman villain.
Yeah.
What are we going to do next, boss? I'm Joe Choinski. Anyway, Joy Choinski, a popular and experienced heavyweight, knocked out Johnson in the 3rd round. Now, since prize fighting was illegal in Texas at the time, both of them were arrested. Well, who told on him? Okay, so a sheriff was in the audience watching the whole thing. He was a big fan of boxing, so he wanted to wait for the match to end before he arrested him.
That is... wow, I don't know what to say
I know.
about that.
He was a fan of boxing, so it gets better. Now, since the sheriff is a big fan of boxing, and he knows it's illegal and he arrested them, the bail was set at $5,000, which you can imagine, we told you the currency, so times that by like 31. And that's roughly about the price for the bail. Now, neither one of them can afford that, so the sheriff permitted both fighters to go home at night as long as they came back and agreed to spar in their jail cell.
To entertain them?
Yes. Mm-mm. So all these sheriffs and these crazy racist white guys with the big cowboy hats in Texas watching this black guy and a white guy fight.
Oh, so they were both... I thought they were both black.
No. This guy is white.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, yeah, Joe Choinski... mm-hmm. is white. I should have mentioned that. I thought the name would have given it away.
No, because I thought Klondike was white and he was a black man.
You think Klondike, white ice cream.
Yeah.
Anyway, for the sheriffs and the people in the police department's entertainment, they made them fight in a cell every day. Just sparring, kind of like. And it was good. I mean, you can't have... It's so hypocritical, isn't it? It's illegal... But whatever you do in that cell is not really illegal because it's like, what? Anyway, Nothing makes sense. Like you can murder people in the cell, not as much illegal Doing it in the cell is out.
No, it is just as illegal.
I know. Being sarcastic. But what are they going to do? Put you in longer? Life sentence times 2. Anyway, so large crowds would gather and watch these sessions, right? After 23 days in jail, their bail was finally reduced to affordable level, and the grand jury refused to indict either man. So, however, Johnson later stated that he learned a lot of his boxing skills during that time. So you got nothing else to do. You're pretty much in training every day.
Yeah.
And you have to be there anyway, so go for it. Now, the two would remain friends, and Johnson even attested that his success in boxing came from the coaching he received from Choinski. So the aging Choinski saw the natural talent that Jack Johnson was developing, and Choinski taught him all the nuances of defense, and even stated, "A man who can move like you should never have to take a punch." So this guy was fast in the ring. He could dodge a punch if he chose to. Mm-hmm. He was very fast. And it reminds me of kind of like Mayweather today, and even Muhammad Ali back in the day, because Muhammad Ali was both great with offensive and defensive fighting. And, people would try to punch him and he would just back out, like he would just, how do you do that? And in Muhammad Ali, he would punch backwards. He would be stepping backwards and punching and landing a hit. Johnson seemed to be one of the first of the unique boxers like that. Mm-hmm. Throughout his career, Johnson built a unique fighting style of his own, which was not common during that time. Though he would typically strike first, he would fight defensively. And when I think of like boxers in that time, I think of them like, with their palms up fighting, like the Fighting Irish kind of look.
Yeah.
Like, come and get it, come and have at it. Like that kind of like. and Johnson fought differently. He had his elbows up and he was just a different fighter. And you see the video, and we'll post a video in the YouTube version of this. You can go onto the This Year in History YouTube channel and check out the video where, as I'm talking about it, I'm going to have the video playing. So you can see these fights take place. So like I said, Johnson would tire them out while becoming more aggressive as the rounds went on. So he would just hit hard. He would get them more tired and worn down and just hit harder. And he had control over the fight. He knew when he was going to knock him out. He often fought to punish his opponents through rounds rather than knocking them out, and would continuously dodge their punches. He would then quickly strike back with a blow of his own, usually knocking him out. Johnson made his fights look effortless, as if he had much more to offer. But when pushed, he would also display much more powerful moves and punches. So he would kind of like hold back, and have his way in the ring. Now, there are films of these fights you can see him holding up his opponent. He could easily knock him out, but he's just kind of like playing with him, nearly toying with him.
Really?
Yeah. Like they're worn out and they're like barely lift their hands, and he's still like jumping around them and kind of toying around with them. He could just simply knock him out, but no, he makes him suffer. That's his style. So Johnson beat his top contender, a former black heavyweight champion named Frank Childs, on October 21st, 1902. Johnson won a TKO in the 12th round of the scheduled 20-rounder when Childs signaled that he could not go on. He claimed he had a dislocated elbow. So you're seeing Jack Johnson, he's like creating injuries on these people, like bad injuries. The defeat by Johnson forever changed Childs' career. He would then defeat several other top contenders. He fought a lot of different people. He got a lot of experience. By 1903, though, Johnson's official record showed him with 9 wins and 3 losses, 5 draws, and 2 no contests. He had won at least 50 fights against both white and black opponents. Johnson won his title on February 3rd, 1903, beating Denver Ed Martin on points in a 20-round match for the World Colored Heavyweight Championship, which I'm sure doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Johnson finally won the World Heavyweight title on December 26th, 1908, a full 6 years after a lightweight champion, Joe Gans, became the first African-American boxing champion. Johnson's victory claimed him world champion. Johnson held the title until it was vacated when he won the World Heavyweight title from the Canadian boxer Tommy Burns in Sydney, Australia on Boxing Day, no relation, 1908. This fight came after following Burns around the world and talking shit. Just putting things in the press, saying things, he would never fight me. And so after years and years of taunting him and the press kind of pushing him too, like, hey, you're going to fight this guy? Burns agreed to fight Johnson only after promoters guaranteed him $30,000 $100,000. And I say that because that's a lot of money back then. Today, that is $818,213. It's a lot of money for one fight.
Yeah.
So why are you going to turn that down? So this fight was his first big fight before the big one I'm going to talk about later. Now, this fight lasted 14 rounds and would have kept going, but it was stopped by the police.
Why was it stopped by the police?
If you see the video, which is a video, and I'll post it in the YouTube video, it looks bad. Johnson beating the shit out of him.
Oh, wow.
Tommy Burns is a great fighter. And he, like I said before, he was kind of toying with him. And he kept hitting him hard and knocking him down to the ground, and he'd get right back up. And you can see that Burns is just defeated. And because this black man was beating a white man so good and so effortlessly, the police came in to prevent a riot. So they pretty much ended it. Jack Johnson won. Mm-hmm. And because of that, there was lots of like racial animosity that grew. And there was even a guy who tried to bring a gun, and they barred like no guns, no alcohol, nothing, right? And so after this victory of Johnson beating Burns, the people called for a quote unquote great white hope to take the title away from Johnson. Wow. So nobody was happy with Johnson having this world heavyweight champion title. Like, no, we cannot have a black man. Now you gotta think, even in Australia, there's still racism. So while Johnson was a heavyweight champion of the world, he was covered more in the press than any black person ever. Like during his time of winning this championship, no black person was talked about. The lead up to the short victory was published by a racist press against Johnson. Now even the New York Times, they wrote, "If a black man wins, thousands and thousands of his ignorant brothers will misinterpret his victory as justifying claims to much more than mere physical equality with their white neighbors."
The New York Times wrote that?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
And that was New York. Yeah, so they were pretty much saying like, if black people see that they can be equal or better than in any way, that's not going to be good for us.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, that was not long ago.
It was not.
As title holder, Johnson then had to face a series of fighters, each billed by boxing promoters as the Great White Hope.
So every next boxer he would fight, it was
if they were white, this is the guy. This guy is going to be the one that's going to win this.
Wow.
So often these were exhibition matches, right? Get this. In 1909, he beat Tony Ross, Al Kaufman, and the middleweight champion Stanley Ketchel. Now, like I said, these are exhibition matches. We're not really real matches. They're more for entertainment purposes. They're not really fight to win or fight to kill. It was more fight to put on a show, right? So they kind of choreograph it a little bit. You know, they say boxing's fake. Well, in this case, yes, it was in a way. You know, they're really showing what they can do, kind of showing off their moves and their abilities and their stamina. So the match with Ketchel was originally thought to have been an exhibition, like I said, and in fact was fought that way by both men until about the 12th round, when Ketchel threw a right to Johnson's head, knocking him down. Now, I saw the video of this. They kind of play fighting, and then Ketchel gets a little cocky and hits Johnson hard in the head. Johnson staggers, goes down to his hands and knees. Jumps up immediately and knocks him the fuck out. Like immediately. Like he was like, "What the hell are you doing? This is an exhibition. Why are you hitting me that hard?" You know, and because of this, Johnson didn't have his guard up because he didn't expect to get hit like that. But you see the video, it's ridiculous. Like within seconds, Johnson jumps up to his feet, hits him really hard, knocks him to the ground, and hit him so hard with a single uppercut, right? Not only that, he also punches out some of his front teeth and has some of those teeth embedded in his boxing glove. Oh, wow. It was a hardcore uppercut, probably the best one you'll ever see. And you could see the rage, you could see the what the fuckness in his mannerism. And like, what the hell are you doing? And just knocked him the fuck out. It's so satisfying to watch. All right, so before I get into this big fight, big finale, let me talk a bit about Jack's personal life, because I've just talked about the fights, right? At this point, he's got money. He's being very extravagant with his spending. He's hiring prostitutes. He's got gold caps on his teeth. Probably has the first grill ever, you know? that I try to find out. I'm like, was it common for people to have gold caps on their teeth? And I really couldn't find much on that, but he was one of them. He didn't need it. He had perfectly good teeth, but he would cap his teeth. And he just wore like really expensive, extravagant, flamboyant clothes. Even clothes that he nearly got arrested for. Like, you can't be seen in a coat like that. That's a very expensive coat. He was just a big spender. And he also bought race cars, which race cars back then only went up to about 75 miles per hour, but he would get them the fastest car he could find, paint them in bright, flashy colors, and just drive them like a regular car, and also often speed down the highway. There's actually a pretty funny story about Jack Johnson speeding through Georgia in the country. He's passing through, and of course he's in his race car. He's exposed. The cop sees as a black man in a nice car. Of course he gets pulled over. And when he pulls him over, the cop's like, you know what it's going to cost you? You're going way too fast. That's going to be $50. So Jack Johnson pulls out this giant wad of cash with 100s. And he takes one of those single 100s and hands it to him. And the cop's like, I can't break this. I can't do anything with this. And Jack Johnson says, don't worry about it. I'm going to speed through here on the way back. So you can just keep the change. So that's how cocky and confident he became.
Wow. Which, in what year was that?
This is
early
1910s. Yeah, like I don't know if it's before or after, but I remember reading that story. And I'm like, I gotta tell that story some point. Actually, it was 1938.
You couldn't even do that today.
You couldn't do that today, especially if you're a black man in a very nice car. And you see how these state troopers are in Texas. Mm-mm. Yeah. You see them get out of the car, it just looks like racism with a big giant hat, yeah. Right? Yeah. And they're just standing
with their hand on their gun already.
Yeah, they got the hand on the gun, the big gut, a big cowboy hat, and they're just standing there in this, like, they're oh man, even that makes me cringe. Like I see that it looks like a picture of racism now in 2020. So you can imagine 110 years ago. Doing the same thing, and you're the only black guy with a nice car. Nicer car than he could ever have. Anyway, so that was a fun little image for me. And the fact that, the cop didn't rob him, there's so much sinister stuff that could have happened, in the middle of the country. Anyway, moving on. I want to get into the fight of the century. 1910. Former undefeated heavyweight champion of the world, or at least of the country. The heavyweight champion, Jim Jeffries. We've got Jack Johnson, Jim Jeffries. There's also a Peter Jackson in the story, but not the comedian, of course. It was this big white man from 1910, undefeated, 6'2", Jim Jeffries, was kind of forced to come out of retirement to fight Johnson. Now, like I said, they've been calling it for this great white hope. Who's it going to be? Since the beginning, they've been calling Jim Jeffries. Jim Jeffries has been retired. He's like done. Jim Jeffries even had a chance to fight Jack Johnson before he retired, but because he set a colored bar, he wouldn't do that. So pretty much he made it so he only fights white people. He would never fight a quote-unquote Negro. He's been in retirement for 6 years. The media, the public, Jim Jeffries, you're our only hope. You are a great white hope. You need to defeat this Negro. Anyway, they didn't roll the R's because they were racist. They should have said negro, but they didn't.
They did not.
So Jim Jeffries has not fought in 6 years, and he had to lose 100 pounds to get back into decent shape just to be at Jack Johnson's level. Now, initially, Jeffries had no interest in the fight and was quite happy as an alfalfa farmer. But those who wanted to see Johnson defeated badgered Jeffries merciless for months and offered him an unheard of sum of $120,019, which is equivalent to about $3.3 million today, which he finally accepted. You want to keep picking alfalfas, or do you want to make a few million? So Jim Jeffries fights Johnson in 1910. Jeffries remained mostly hidden from media attention until the day of the fight, so he kind of laid low. He didn't want people to see how fat he was. And he worked out, and he worked out for 100 pounds, which is very impressive. And he's a big man. He's a very impressive looking man. He looks like the best contender for Jack Johnson. Jim Jeffries is 6'2", which is hard to see when they're fighting, because the way Jim Jeffries fights in the videos, he's crouched down. He kind of bends his knees nearly at a 45-degree angle. And he's one of those guys that kind of like have his fists up to his face, kind of the old typical boxers in that time. Very traditional boxer. Whereas Jack Johnson stands upright, shoulders back, ready for the fight. So they're two very different stylish boxers. Because of all this media attention and pressure, Johnson soaked up most of the spotlight since Jim Jeffries was kind of out of the spotlight completely. So it was all Johnson. Family company. So now I'm going to briefly tell you about John L. Sullivan. So John L. Sullivan is a former champion boxer, also nicknamed the Boston Strong Boy. He is a champion of his time, but at this point in Jack Johnson's career, he becomes a commentator. He's retired, and he's kind of like the Joe Rogan of boxing during that time. In the way he looks, he's got this giant handlebar mustache. The poses he does in the pictures, he's got the palms up like I mentioned earlier. And he looks like the typical 19th century boxer, the stereotype. He stated that Johnson was in such great physical shape compared to Jeffries that he could only lose if he had the lack of skill and ability on that day. So before the fight, Jeffries remarked, quote unquote, "It's my intention to go right after my opponent and knock him out as soon as possible." His wife added, "I'm not interested in prize fighting, but I am interested in my husband's welfare. I do hope he will win this last fight." So Johnson, what he had to say about that was, "May the best man win." Racial tension was brewing leading up to the fight, and to prevent any harm to either boxers, guns were prohibited from the arena and the sale of alcohol.
Wasn't apples also banned?
You are so right. Apples are banned weapons. And a very popular weapon. If you got hit with a tomato, that's kind of an insult, but with an apple, holy shit, especially if it's frozen. Anyway, could they freeze apples back then? Yeah. If you were rich. No, you couldn't. I don't know.
I have no idea.
Maybe if you were in Klondike. Yep, so apples were also banned. All fruits, vegetables, and banana peels were banned. So with all the racial attitudes and all this hate being fired up, there's a lot of bets being made. And the investment in Jim Jeffries was an odds of 10-7 in the favor of Jeffries. The fight took place on July 4th, 1910, in front of 20,000 people, which is about 2 million people these days.
Shut up.
At a ring built just for this one occasion in downtown Reno, Nevada. Now, I have to mention, you're thinking of a big arena, cameras, lights, big giant stadium. This is outside. Boxing matches took place outside in a desert on July 4th.
That is crazy.
So it's ridiculous. Like,
Can you imagine the heat?
I imagine the heat, but also imagine how many rounds they have.
Oh, wow.
It's insane. These fights go on for hours. Anyway, so in Reno, Nevada, July 4th, Independence Day, 1910, 20,000 people. Jim Jeffries is an older man. Jack Johnson looks much younger and more in shape. So this fight goes on, and there's a video of this also. And after the 15th round, after Jeffries has been knocked down twice, for the first time in his career, so he's never been knocked down, he's undefeated, undisputed, the people in Jeffries' corner threw in the towel to end the fight and prevent Jeffries from having a knockout on his record. So he was beating the complete shit out of him. And yeah, he was out of shape. He's been out of boxing for 6 years, which was, you would think, way too long. But he was the great white hope. And so the pressure was on. He still got paid. But yeah, he just knew to call it quits. His people were like, yeah, he's destroying you out there. He's going to throw in the towel. So Johnson later told the media that he knew the fight was over in the 4th round when he landed an uppercut and he saw the look on Jeffries' face, stating, "I knew what that look meant. The old ship was sinking."
Oh, wow.
Oh, man. Afterwards, Jeffries was humbled by this loss and by what he witnessed in the ring. And Jeffries said, "I could never have whipped Johnson at my best. I couldn't have hit him. No, I couldn't have reached him in 1,000 years." So Jim Jeffries is saying, even in my prime, my top physical condition, in the best of my boxing career, I could not have beaten Jack Johnson, which I think says a lot, especially since he's a blatant racist and I think there's something that they share in the ring, you know, with all these, like, you have people who are like on the outskirts shouting racial things. Now, another thing about Jack Johnson, I mentioned before, he was toying with his people, with his opponents. He would kind of go and have little conversations on the side of the ring, you know. He would kind of taunt his opponents by talking to their people in his corner of the ring. He would predict which round he was going to knock his opponent out and in. He was just so comfortable with himself. He just knew that when it came to boxing, he was superior. And he knew from watching his opponents that he could dominate this fight. So the fight of the century earned Johnson $65,000, which is well over $1.8 million today. And silenced his critics who had belittled Johnson's previous victory over Tommy Burns as empty, claiming that Burns was a false champion since Jeffries had retired undefeated. So the guy, John L. Sullivan, commentator, he said, "The fight of century is over, and the black man is the undisputed champion of the world." He continues to say, "What a crafty, powerful, cunning left hand Johnson has. He is one of the craftiest, cunningest boxers that have ever stepped into the ring. They both fought closely, all during the 15 rounds, and it was just the sort of fight that Jeffries wanted. There was no running or ducking like Colbert did with me in New Orleans."
Who are those people?
These are other people. He's just talking about, like, I think he's just being a little passive aggressive, saying like, yeah, I wasn't like running away and ducking like the guy I fought or whatever.
Oh.
So this guy's like big in boxing. He's a commentator also. And he says Jeffries did not miss so many blows because he hardly started any. Johnson was on top of him all the time. Johnson didn't get gay at all with Jeffries in the beginning. And it was always the white man who clinched. But Johnson was very careful. He backed away and took no chances, and was good-natured with it all. The best man won, and I was one of the first to congratulate him, and also one of the first to extend my heartfelt sympathy to the beaten man, Jim Jeffries. So there you have it, the fight of the century, 1910. So there's so much about his boxing career that I would need a few hours just to tell this whole story, but there's people who have done that. There's a really good documentary, 3.5 hour long documentary from Ken Burns, the director.
Oh, really?
On PBS, yeah. And it's a really good documentary. It's where I got most of my research. And yeah, it was really good. And that's where I saw the fights and everything. And, you know, if you really want to look at this in depth, it's the rise and fall of Jack Johnson. There's a documentary called Unforgivable Blackness, the rise and fall of Jack Johnson. So really quickly, I want to tell you about a little bit of his personal life, because there's another story there. Like, his boxing career is one episode, and then his personal life and all the other things he did was another one. So one thing I should mention about Jack Johnson and who he was, he didn't give a fuck about anything. He was going to do what he wanted to do. He did not feel that he was inferior to white people, so he didn't act that way. Because he was part of the first generation of black people who were not born into slavery, they were called the quote-unquote new Negroes, right? And he wore that like a badge of honor. Mm-hmm. And he kind of like said, well, my parents were slaves, I'm not. So he had this kind of demeanor about him, which I really admire, where if I'm not a slave, I'm not going to be treated like a slave. So he kind of walked around and did not take that racist nonsense from people. And so one of the things he did was, which was very controversial, is he would hire white prostitutes, date white women, and marry white women. Now, sometimes during his matches, I didn't talk about all this then because there's so much to do with the actual fights, but he would have white women around his arm, which is something you do not do. And he wasn't even married to them. They could be like a prostitute, or they could be a girlfriend, or just a friend with benefits, whatever they were to him. He would have his arm around them, and they would be like, oh, who's this lovely lady with you? This is my wife. And he would just say, this is my wife. And they would get in the newspapers and stuff, and like, black man marries white woman. And that was crazy. And so he would just do stuff like that. And he ended up really having an actual white wife. So I'll tell you about some of his spouses. So his first marriage was in 1911 to a Brooklyn socialite and divorcee, Etta Terry Duryea, I think is how you pronounce it. Their relationship was anything but stable. And Duryea, who suffered from depression, ended up committing suicide in 1912, just a year later. Mm-hmm. The thing about Jack Johnson is he loved and cared about this woman, Etta. And she was, like I said, a Brooklyn socialite. She had money. He was known, of course, for dating white women. And some of the things he would do is he would have a fight in New York or wherever it was, and he would have Etta kind of flown out there to be with him. But also he would bring one of his prostitutes in and have them at another hotel, which that's not cool for anyone really. But, it's just kind of like what he did. He felt free and that's what he was going to do. So I think Etta kind of picked up on that. So Etta didn't take that very well. She was already a divorcee. She was always suffering through depression. Just months after Etta ended her own life, Johnson married Lucille Cameron, another white lady. But she divorced him in 1924 because of his philandering. A year later, the boxer married Irene Pinot, and the couple remained together until his death in 1946. He kind of died a little bit tragically. He was in North Carolina, and he went to this restaurant. And the restaurant, of course, it was segregated. This is the 40s still. They didn't allow him to eat inside. Like, you can eat on the patio or you can take the food to go, but they wouldn't allow him to eat. Well, Jack Johnson, being the man who he is, who does not take racism or discrimination very well, he got really angry. So they left. And he's kind of in a rage. I don't know if you've ever been out behind the wheel when you're angry, but you kind of make moves that you usually wouldn't, kind of dangerous. And I believe that's what caused his accident. He had a race car for one, and he's driving speed down the highway, lost control, and hit a light post and was killed. And so it's a tragic death of him. But he had a lot of controversy following him. I mean, when he was married to white women, and he was hated by racists all over the country already. Jealous people seeing his wealth, thinking he's not deserving of it. There's so much about his story. And another thing that he did, which was kind of frowned upon, is even when Johnson won his championship, he maintained the color bar, the one that Jim Jeffries had. So he decided, I've won, and the only people that could beat me are other black people, and I'm not going to let that happen. So I'm going to maintain the same color bar that Jim Jeffries did. He was looked at as being a hypocrite for that, etc.
So he just has like a very controversial life.
Very, very. He was all about doing what he wanted to do in the way he wanted to do it. Now, he lost his title on April 5th, 1915 to Jess Willard, a working cowboy from Kansas who started boxing when he was just 27 years old. And that was taking place in Havana, Cuba. So that's where he lost his fight and kind of his career ended and went downhill from there. Now, there was another controversial thing that happened with his wife, Lucille. White racists are trying to get him for anything they can. And so in 1912, Johnson was arrested. Forget this. He violated the Mann Act. What's the Mann Act? I think you know this. You want to tell me about this? Because you've told me about this.
I vaguely remember. It's like if you're transporting a white woman across state lines for indecent reasons.
Pretty much, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
It wasn't just for white women; it's women at all.
Oh, women.
Yeah, any woman. But because he's black, that makes it even worse in his situation. So yeah, it's pretty much transporting women across state lines for immoral purposes. And so yeah, you got it right. And so Lucille Cameron, his most recent wife, they try to get him for that. And even her mother swore that her daughter was insane. And less than a month after he was released from that charge, Johnson was arrested again on similar charges. This time, the woman, another alleged prostitute, Belle Schreiber, with whom he had been involved with in 1909 and 1910, testified against him. So now everyone's turning against him. I think they're trying to make some money or some fame. I don't know. It was so long in the past. And so now they're getting him for the people he's been with, for his inappropriate relations or whatever. So it's a brilliant story and a very tragic ending. He did live a long life. He died at the age of 68 and was buried next to his wife, Etta Johnson, the one who killed herself in 1912. His grave was initially unmarked and then marked with a large stone that bore only the name Johnson. This changed in 2005 after the Ken Burns documentary, which I mentioned earlier. So that is the story of the Galveston Giant, Jack Johnson, 1910.
All right, so what else happened in 1910?
The Mexican Revolution begins when Francisco Madero proclaims the elections of 1910 null and void and calls for an armed revolution at 6 p.m.
Woo! Mary Malone, also known as Typhoid Mary, is freed from her first periods of forced isolation and goes on to cause several further outbreaks of typhoid in the New York area.
Henry Ford sells 10,000 automobiles.
On March 10th, the Republic of China officially abolishes slavery. A little late on that, but...
They're like, oh, America's doing it. Modern neon lighting is first demonstrated by Georges Claude at the Paris Motor Show. That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Neon lights, I always wonder where they came from.
On March 26th, the U.S. forbids immigration to criminals, anarchists, the sick, and the very poor.
Well, that concludes our episode for 1910. Please join us again next week for 1911.
We'll see you in 1911. Don't forget to sign up for our Patreon where we release a bonus episode.
Yes, and check us out on social media. We're on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube. And share and tell your friends about this show. We got a lot of people liking this show, but not a lot of people know about it. So please share it if you know anybody that might be interested.
Rate and review, please.
Rate and review. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.